Hi, Merlin. How are you again?
Shu-Yi, excellent. Yeah, it's just so interesting to see, weeks go by, students come in, they go out, they come back again the next week. Before you know, it's like 5 years have gone past. And it's just, yeah, it's just wonderful to watch the celebrations that show up, um, frustrations that show up as well. I can add that too. Yeah.
Yeah. In the States, most of the teachers are still doing online lessons. It's hard for teachers to maybe they feel bad to implement what the students need to practice. So lately I've been hearing some question about expectation. Teachers sometimes feel like, how come the students don't know what I expect that they need to practice? Or maybe it's the other way. The students are not sure what the teachers expect them to do to be defined as a good practice. Seems to be a big topic, especially when we're doing everything online.
Yeah, it's huge. And, when you mentioned that we might talk about expectations today, I have a favorite quote. So I've got this quote all ready to go
Yeah.
from, from this book. So the book is Your Child's Self-Esteem. It's by a woman named Dorothy Corkill Briggs. Um, this book has a long history with me. So, published in 1970, I imagine Dorothy Corkill Briggs would have been in her 50s, maybe in her 60s by the time she wrote this book. Um, and for me, as a young teacher, it had a huge impact on my teaching. One page in particular really set the ball rolling. And it was the page where she says, words have power, and that the words we use convey so much about our expectations to our students and so on. But the quote that she has about expectations
Yeah.
is really amazing. So here's what it is. And she says, children rarely question our expectations. Instead, they question their personal adequacy.
Mm. Mm.
So what does that, where does your mind go when you read that? Well, for me, it meant immediately that I had to be really careful about my expectations for my students, because it wasn't enough just that I had expectations for them. Because no matter what my expectations were, according to Dorothy Corkill Briggs, um, children would jump in and try their best. But in the process, they may question, am I really up for this? Can I really do this? Is this possible for me? So I like this idea that we're going to talk about expectations this morning a little bit.
Right. So then the word expectation will um, will give me this a lot of questions. One is when we show the students our expectation, we must remember to show them how to get to that expected performance or expected way of holding a bow, expected way of plucking a string, or expected our expected way of count and play some rhythm correctly. So if the teacher has an expected goal, the teacher must remember to provide enough information. Otherwise, like you said, with the students' desire to fulfill that to achieve to that goal that we set, there will be definitely a lot of frustration and disappointment.
Yeah. And for me, I like where you're going, because it's about what are the steps in order to get there. So it's like, you may set a benchmark of playing a piece with no mistakes. So that's a great goal to have right away.
Yes.
But if the student makes 6 or 7 mistakes in the piece already, going to 0 mistakes, not a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember I had one student, um, she moved to Calgary, where I live. She moved to Calgary. She'd taken maybe a year of lessons. So in book one, she played confidently, but every piece was really, really slow. It was like, go, tell, and row. It was like that. And there would be 6 or 7 mistakes in every single piece.
Mm.
And as I'm listening to this was her second lesson with me. I said, this is so interesting that you play so, with so much effort. I said, what would it be like? Let's see what would happen if you play the piece faster. Let's see if maybe some of your mistakes will disappear. And so, in the idealistic world, you might think, oh, yeah, she played faster and all the mistakes went away. But that's not what happened at all. But 40% of the mistakes did go away when she played quicker. And
Mm.
so then it just became for me, okay, play all your pieces as fast as you want, as fast as you can.
Mhm.
And so my expectation was we've got to find a way to play more accurately, but how to get there was really a long step-by-step role that first of all took doing the opposite to what you're doing right now.
Interesting. So this student actually play less mistakes by playing faster. That's very interesting because isn't it usually the other way?
Well, I would say our expectation
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
our expectation is that if you play slow, you can concentrate on every single note. And if you're an adult and you want to speak very slowly, you can. But for kids, it's a completely different world. And what I very quickly came to conclude with this student was that when she played slow, she got lost. She couldn't keep track of where she was in the piece. It didn't relate in any way to the recording that she was listening to, or the model that I might have played for her, or even how we sang "Go Tell Aunt Rhody" in group class. Had no relationship with that whatsoever.
Mm, right. So you just use the word relation. I think a lot of time, if the teachers miss drawing the relation from what the students already know or from what the students feel comfortable with or from what the students have mastered and feel fun to do, if we miss the chance to bridge that relation, to bring that relation to the new stuff, to the new objective, um, then sometimes I call that streamlining. We need to make sure our teaching it's cohesive by understanding the students and draw that relation to make our expectation more. It could be more logical or more reasonable or more endurable. It depends. But that is a big skill to be able to find the relation.
Yeah, and it involves then this idea of adapting. I mean, it really is about adapting expectations for
Mm.
every single student. And I just think I've got one student right now. He can sit down and play pieces hands together all the way through in 5 minutes. I've got another student to spend 5 minutes on one bar, really going step by step, going, oh, play together now, play one finger now, play together now. That's a 5-minute job.
Hmm.
So how do we recognize who students are? No, I think we can do that quite quickly, actually. Um, and we as human beings, we are really good at recognizing each other quite quickly. This is one thing that we have to know how to do. You have to know how to walk into a room and be able to tell who in this room is going to be friendly that I can talk to in the next 10 minutes. You got to have that ability. So very quickly, I think at all stages of life, we're always refining this ability to see who another person is. And teachers, what I like to think is we need to get really quick at coming up with plan B, C, D, and E. So we have our plan A. My plan A is I'm going to shake hands and I'm going to ask, how's the weather today? That's a great opening line. If that doesn't work, you got to have another plan. How many brothers and sisters do you have? If that doesn't work, you got to have another plan. And for me, it's the same thing in music lessons as well. So if your first thing doesn't work, you got to have plan B. And if your first thing does work, you've also got to have how can you tighten the grip then on the first one that works as well.
Right. So I like the you're saying about this plan A, plan B, plan C, and I think that's when I'm coaching new teachers, that's a pretty big missing part in their training because I think it could go all the way back to our own university study, right? When our own teachers showed us only one way of doing something and we kind of pound our head to try to figure out what did he mean, what did he mean. But that that formula doesn't work for teaching young beginners or young students. Perhaps new teachers, if you're listening, you can challenge yourself by practicing to write down what's my plan B, what's my plan C. If a student does not respond to your expected way of teaching, then what's your plan C to reword something or plan D to explain something with either using different analogies or different scenarios. And then, like you said earlier, if the plan A works, then what's the strengthening step? What's the,
Yeah,
like you said, turning the ball? Because plan A, if it works, it just means that's a good first step. It doesn't.
right.
That's not the end of a teaching, and so that's another thing that a lot of new teachers um, fail to recognize that that's just the first step of learning. You do need to go through the strengthening, or even you would go into, like you mentioned in your podcast, the plateau, the confusion process that could go into that. And then there should be the process of when you said using different ways to play something, close your eyes and play something. For me, sometimes it's laying down on the floor and play Gotian Roadie with a cello. To I feel like that's the almost close to the end of a learning episode. If a student is able to play the cello in a different creative ways, that shows me that the connection is there. They have demonstrate they have related what they know to what they don't know.
Yeah.
But this process, it needs to be, maybe this is the sort of a teaching formula that you mentioned earlier, part of the formula.
Yeah, well, you got some really important things there. So there was the explaining, there is the demonstrating of it, there is the feeling of it. So there are all these mechanisms that we can use to convey ideas and processes. And so becoming comfortable with them, becoming comfortable with more than one way of approaching a particular task. That seems like that's the big job for teachers to do. But I'll also add that there's one more, which is to ask the student to lead the way.
Right. So give them the baton to conduct for a while.
Yeah,
And that's a
yeah,
great way, I must agree. That's a great way to see what they have learned from you. What do you have transferred to their playing. Yeah.
and it's funny when you ask kids to lead. The other day, I was talking to one of my students, maybe 7, and I was just saying, it's up to him to tell his brain what to do when he's practicing. And he just kind of looked in, we're on Zoom. So he just looked in the camera and said, well, that's all good advice, but my brain doesn't always listen to what I have to say, is what he did.
I love
And I
that.
thought, absolutely, that is the challenge that we have.
Right. Sometimes I will ask, well, not really ask, but I'll share with my students. It is hard to focus, isn't it? For example, right now I'm thinking about my dinner. So it's just to help them say, oh, yeah, I'm not the only one have to practice to focus or have to go through, like, where's my mind while I'm in the lesson. Yeah, that's always a fun way to help them come back to you or come back to relate their thinking relate to the lesson. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting.
It's the other thing that I would say about expectations is that they really have to fit the child. So, and it's not about, uh, being so, what word can I use? So easygoing that nothing really happens in your teaching. It's not about that at all. But really, expectations have to fit the child. And when they fit the child well, um, the child is empowered, then I feel as well.
Mhm. Right. So how, but how do we know? I guess it's the first step is that um, teachers need to practice to set up the set up that expectation that really fits a child. But how do how can they assess their expectation if it's really I what the two words I think about is either empathy, more empathetic, or compassionate. Uh, but this takes practice.
Yeah, for sure. It does. It takes practice. And that's part of what we are doing. And because we're in this process of teaching for the long haul. So I think also what's challenging for teachers is that um, the moment of teaching becomes very precious. And we feel like I have to make the most out of this moment of teaching. And it might be that that moment of teaching is about letting things go for a while. It's about not about just, okay, I acknowledge, yeah, or I'll go back to my student who's playing really slow. So I don't have to fix everything about this child in this one lesson. We can just focus on playing pieces quicker. What will happen when she plays quicker? Well, things regarding hand position and the tone production are going to suffer. Am I going to add all those things on? No, I'm just going to sit back and say, here's one thing that we can work on. It will improve and become more stable over time. Um, if I focus on it too long, though, it will become just another thing that he's pushing me to do, and I would really like to do something else. So yeah, I come back to our old ebb and flow.
Exactly. I think ebb and flow and really recognize what expectation level or what type of expectation can really fit the student at that moment. These are definitely a big topics that teachers can practice to get better at. So I think that it goes back to, for example, a lot of cases are um, my students who are really good at playing Goten and Roti and perpetual motion because they have been that's their old piece, their review pieces. They have played with eyes closed, with singing or doing different things that they show them they have mastered and they enjoy playing the piece. The next song is a new song, so that when they're doing new song, their posture, they start slouching or they could be squeezing your hand a little bit, and oftentimes parents get really surprised. Well, John, you already played the last five pieces with perfect posture and perfect bow hold, but this new piece, he's getting worse. And I often have to use that opportunity to explain to the parents that he's not getting worse. He's just putting his brain power on the new material. When they learn something new, part of the old stuff will give away, will give up a little bit. And that goes back to what you said, letting something go for a little bit. And I think this applies to not just parents but teachers. Should have that kind of preparation. Like when a student learn a new piece, something could go away for a little bit, and something will come back when when they're reviewing. So it's not like every song they will play perfectly every single time. Um, so I think yeah, that goes back to kind of the your idea about ebb and flow, right? It's always a little bit of down and up, mistakes and getting better, mistaking, getting better. But in the long term, we teachers will learn to have a we need to learn to preserve this long-term chart, not just the short-term growth chart, but the long-term growth chart. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we have to keep in mind that students have their own expectations as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that they're very good. I remember this is a teenager showed up one week, maybe a couple weeks in a row. And I hadn't seen much demonstration of what I would call secure playing. And for some reason, I asked him this very unusual question. I said to him, and he was maybe 14, 15, 16. I said, so you have friends, right? And the young guy said, I have friends. I said, well, I understand that with friendships, that friends have different roles to play for each other. What role would you say that you play for your friends? And he looked at me like, the teen, whatever. Why are we talking about this? Like, really? This is a piano lesson? Like, hello. But anyway, so he just looked at me and I just, what role? I emphasized that what I'm interested in. He said, well, actually, I'm the instigator. I'm the agitator. I'm the person in my friends group that, I always get good marks on exams. He's saying, I always get good marks on my exams. And when my friends don't get good marks on their exams, I just like ride them for days. Like, what's wrong with you? Can't you get a good mark on your exam? What's wrong with you? Like, really, is something that I should know about that you can't do it? And I said, that's so interesting that you are the agitator for your friends, because today I need to be the agitator for you, to say that your expectations of this particular assignment that you're working on, you're not even at, I can't even see you above water yet. You're drowning somewhere.
Sink or swim.
And he looked at me like, if I hadn't told him that story about being the instigator, I'd be safe. But he told me the story. And then I went further in my own reflection after he left. I realized that this young person can be an agitator for his friends because he is their friend, because he has a relationship with them that they value. And it's not the value of being instigator, it's the value of being a friend, of being someone who cares for them, who understands them. Because that relationship is there already, he can add this other component as well. Without this component of caring and being a good friend, the instigator, if that's all he did, he'd be out of the group immediately.
Right. So it's not just being an instigator, but because of a strong connection that he owns with all his friends, that human connection
Yeah.
in, enable him to be the agitator. And I think that sounds like a really tight knit precious friendship there. So I think
Yeah.
that yeah, that's a really good example for teachers who are listening. If they of course, I've heard this many times also. Like, we don't need to be this our students' best friend, but but I think
No.
learning from this, its connection is I think is the first step. Is the must. We need to make sure that we have opened the window to let the student connect with us, to let the student don't look at us just as, oh, the teacher to make me do things. And
Right.
then they might be curious about our expectation.
Yeah. So you mentioned empathy, a couple of probably
Mhm,
10 minutes ago. And
mhm,
it really is that, isn't it? That empathetic relationship.
mhm.
And there's another wonderful quote in this book, Dorothy Corcoran, and it
Yes.
has to do with love. And she talks about, children don't, what did she say? Something that children need to feel that they are loved. Not that children are loved, but children need to feel that they're loved. And she makes a strong difference. To say, oh, I love my children. Yeah, well, that's great. But do they feel your love? That would be the question. Because you can love them, but they might never feel it.
Mm.
So as teachers, we have kind of the same thing. Yeah, I am an empathetic teacher, but does the student actually feel your empathy? And how do you demonstrate your empathy for your students?
That's definitely a big challenge, I think. I mean, for new teachers, I think, yeah, because you can't just say, because I have tried, it must be working. It's a
Yeah.
lot of time we have tried many times. That goes back to your earlier the plan A, plan B, plan C. When we have plan A, B, C, D, and then the further development from each A, B, C, D, it could be plan A1, A2, A3, or plan B, B1, B2, B3. With that order of having many different options can help us adjust our expectation and help us having these ways. Oh, I'm teaching plan A. I'm following plan A. Plan A doesn't work. Let me ditch that. Try plan B. Maybe the student will echo better with plan B. Oh, plan B worked. Great. Let's go on to plan B1. Let's go on to plan B2. But then the next thing is maybe the student will come up with plan B3. Give them a space to share what they know at that moment, and then you have a moment to check on the possibility. Maybe I need to modify my expectation,
Yeah.
because sometimes the expectation is like, I remember one of the podcasts in your Crucible I like a lot is that sometimes if your expectation is too low, that can also cause frustration or disappointment
Yeah.
from students. It's not just only the problem of setting up too high, but it's too low, and that's too high or too low both present the miscommunication, right? Yeah, that's
So I
wonderful.
like where because we've got teachers leading the way, coming up with ABC. We've got students, well, we've got teachers following the students' lead as well. And then we've got this third point, which is the relationship is what's going to make it all possible. And
Yeah.
so we might even think if plan A, B, and C aren't working, and if students leading the way isn't working, you might just want to question, so what is your relationship with this student? What kind of relationship do you have? Do you have a relationship with this student that will allow for change?
Mm.
Or do you have a relationship with this student where change, no, that's not comfortable yet?
Mm-hmm. Right. I feel like also a very simple solution, if the teachers are now scratching their heads at the end of this podcast, maybe I feel one question I can offer is that ask just simply in the lesson, ask the student, what should we do? Sometimes I do at the end of my wits end of, what do you think? Or what do you think the expectation should be? Or that's another way to let the student have a say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good topic, expectations. And I think we've worked through some good ideas here. This is
Yeah, great. Wonderful. I can't wait for our next time. Good.